Verbasco. I'm a clinical social worker in the Kansas City area, and I've been practicing in both the state of Missouri and Kansas for the last 40 years. I've been involved with infertility since 1986. I work with 3 fertility practices in the Kansas City area, so I see a lot of families that are trying to make the decision of starting a family with the use of donor sperm, egg, and also embryo. Okay. Wendy, you want to go?
Sure. I'm Wendy Kramer, and my son Ryan and I started the Donor Sibling Registry. So I'm the mom of a donor-conceived child, and the Donor Sibling Registry was started in 2000, and we now have 36,500 members, and we've helped to connect almost 10,000 donor-conceived people with either their half-siblings or their biological fathers, their donors. And so we connect people, we educate people, we research and publish research, and we're a community. We are the only worldwide community for donor-conceived people and donors and parents-to-be, where we're just trying to help everybody.
And I'm Wendy's son. She pretty much covered it.
I'm Phyllis Lowinger, and I'm a clinical social worker in private practice in New York City. I'm also a parent through adoption and birth, and I'm a support group leader for the organization of Resolve, which Wendy's now giving me somewhat of an inside look at some political issues, and I was the first support group leader that led a support group for couples dealing with male infertility, and I'm proud to say it was probably in the later 80s that I was a strong advocate of known donors.
My name is John Sobraski. I'm a psychotherapist and an adoptee. I work a lot in the field of adoption. I have a big interest in the history of adoption, and looking at the history and looking at assisted reproduction, I see a déjà vu all over again, and it really is very compelling to me. I think that those of us in the adoption field need to do what we can with our brothers and sisters in assisted reproduction and be as connected and supportive as we can to really make sure that some of the awful, awful dark periods of adoption are not repeated in this new exploding territory of assisted reproduction.
I'm Bill Cordray. I'm a donor-conceived adult. I was born in 1945. And contrary to what John says, it's not a new reproductive technology. The history goes back to at least 1884. And had been practiced in the United States under a cloak of secrecy for at least 100 years before it became a covered in the media. And it was a well-kept secret basically by policies of individual infertility specialists convincing their parents, the recipients of donor sperm, not to tell their children. And anonymity has been the rule for the majority of the time of the practice of donor conception. And it's only in recent years that it's become somewhat open thanks to the work of actually the Sperm Bank of California, which was the first clinic that served single women and lesbian couples, which prior to that time had been excluded from the practice of donor insemination. It was basically seen as a couples therapy, although it's not really a medical practice, and it's the doctors have acted as sociologists and recommending anonymity and recommending non-disclosure, and those of us in the older generation of donor-conceived adults are battling that, and I have a private website that is a safe haven for adults conceived through donor conception, and as a support group. It's worldwide. It started the same time as Wendy's group, but because it's a restricted group, limited to donor-conceived people, its membership is a little over 200, but it includes 11 different countries.
So here we are, and we're really very interested in trying to keep the movement going in terms of more openness and perhaps federal legislation. We'll be talking about that in a little bit. Since I've been in practice, I have seen movement, even with ASRM. They published an article probably 5 years ago about recommending that families talk to their children about their donor conceptions. When I first joined ASRM, I didn't think I would ever see that in my lifetime. So there has been some movement, but with the dollars involved and the big industry, it just makes it very difficult for us consumers and professionals to try to move the institution towards more honesty and to do away with secrecy. I said in the workshop this morning that my first meeting at an ASRM was in 1988, and I was in a crowd of folks that were being taught about donor sperm, donor egg, and embryo, and I had the nerve to stand up and ask a question about what about the children that are created from all these methods, and what about their need for medical history. And so I got the mic taken away from me. So I just have that claim to fame that happened. I also have had a wonderful mentor in Annette Barron, who wrote Lethal Secrets, and she passed away. It'll be 2 years this coming August. My last encounter with her, she said, "You know, Chris, I'm getting old, and I don't have as much fight in me anymore, so I'm giving the baton to you to keep fighting and making movements in a more honest, ethical practice in donor conception." So I'm taking that on and see what can happen. I'd like to have Wendy talk about some of the federal stuff that's going on, and then everybody else make comments as you can.
Yeah, well, Ryan and I met with our state, he's a representative, yeah, with our congressman in January to talk about putting forward some federal legislation. Right now there's no oversight, there's no regulation for the entire industry. And as a result, there's no accurate record keeping, there's no updating of medical records, they don't know how many kids are born for any one donor, they don't know who they are, where they are when medical issues arise, they don't even know how to contact the families, they don't know who the families are. So there's many problems within the industry, and we'd like to see them move forward in a more responsible manner. We can't overhaul the whole system, but if we can start with some accountability and some ethical action, then that would be terrific. So we'd like to start with accurate record keeping and taking a look at the rights of donor offspring to know who their biological parents are when they turn, 18, younger, I think. I had a kid who would have been great for him to know a lot younger than 18. But you have to start somewhere, and sometimes you just have to compromise on getting, having some movement. So Representative Polis out of Boulder, Colorado, we've met with his people once. We're meeting with them again next week, and they're very interested in, we've sent them a ton of information, and in moving forward and trying to see, is there something that we could do to push this forward? The big obstacle is the American Society of Reproductive Medicine. Unfortunately, they're big, they're powerful, and they have lobbyists in Washington, and they've stopped any and all legislation, any and all regulation. They just will not allow any oversight of their industry whatsoever. So we're up against a very, very big and powerful and wealthy entity. And we know that, and we're just going to keep doing it anyway. So we'll see what happens. But I think even, what we were just talking about this, so far, the best power that we have is with the media. So what we do is we keep telling the stories, telling family stories, telling donor stories, telling donor-conceived people stories, parent stories, groups of sibling stories. That's the best that we can do right now, is to educate the public, educate the industry, and educate all of those affected by donor insemination, including parents-to-be, those who are embarking on the journey, because they should be fully aware of all of these questions to ask. So that's just another avenue we're pushing in. I'm not highly optimistic. Given what the ASRM has done everywhere else, they just squelch it out everywhere. But we'll try. It can't hurt, and at least it gets we can sort of talk about it publicly, and it just keeps it as a public discussion, which is always a good thing too.
Yeah, I just want to add a comment. Wendy sent out an announcement probably about a month ago and asked people on her list to contact their congressperson. And so I did that, and I got a response from a congresswoman in Topeka, Kansas. And I've had telephone conversations with her staff. And then I have a friend who's an adoptee in Topeka that's her personal friend. So we're hopeful to get a meeting and try to get interest with her. She's already contacted us with interest and start getting that done. I have a sample of the letters that I sent out to the Congress people and my colleagues, and then I also forwarded a couple articles, and at least it got one attention, and I think if all of us can do something like that and get some attention and refer your congressperson to the folks that are interested, continue to be interested, that we could have some exciting things happen.
Can I respond to that? What Wendy has done has broken down the wall of secrecy in the sperm banks, as well as the sperm bank of California, which was a revolutionary thing to create identity-released donors who were committed to making contact with the children that they conceived. And the problem with the United States versus other countries, there are at least 17 countries that have access to adoption records for adult adoptees that are not retrospective. There are 13 jurisdictions outside of the United States that have access to donor-conceived people have access to their records if they were conceived after the date of the enactment of the law. It's not retrospective. So the problem with legislation at this point in the United States, as I see it, is basically we need to get open records for adopted people first, because they've made the biggest. We've got a huge critical mass of adopted people and activists and social workers and experts on adoption that could really push this. As of now, we basically have donor insemination parents and a small non-critical mass of donor-conceived people who know about their conception. And so until we can get the idea that a sperm donor has less of a right, has no more right of privacy than a birth parent, then we won't have retrospective access to records. And the only country that's now doing that is the state of Victoria in Australia, which now has legislation that is passed through their law committee that recommends retrospective access to records for donor-conceived people, and that is not up for vote yet, but it has passed that legal committee. And I mean, Wendy's been amazing, and I think the fact that she's has joined forces with people like Naomi Kahn, who wrote Test Tube Families, about the need for a mandatory registry of donor conception of all donors instead of a voluntary registry that the ASRM recommends. I think that goes a long way. And just the fact that her registry has been so successful really puts ASRM to shame. So,
Well, the ASRM just squelched another proposal for a registry in New York. They fought against it, and that was a voluntary registry. They're against all registries.
Right.
They're against any record keeping.
right.
They're against any accountability across the board.
No.
And partly because these other countries where adoption and donor conception legislation is passed is primarily because it's governmental controls over the medical profession as well as adoption. And in the United States, the medical profession is self-regulating. Until
Well,
you get
it's-
beyond that, and they had huge resources, almost like the National Council for Adoption and all of the church-based adoption agencies, their accumulated funding has defeated adoption reform for so many years. That's what we're up against.
But what's hard in adoption is that also that we have the problem of more and more the adoption field is changing. So many of the adoptions now are child welfare based. That's the largest proportion, the largest part of the pie. Infant domestic adoption is down to very, very low numbers now, and most of those are open adoptions. And the other small portion is international, and that continues to get smaller. So we have a big chunk of people from the 50s and earlier. 1975 was the highest number in adoption. I think it was 175,000. I think it was that date. So we have a cohort of people who can be those activists that you're talking about, Bill, but they're starting to age out. And the problem is we only have 10 states, I think, that are on board already, another 40 to go. So I don't know if I'd hang my hat on that. I don't know if that's going to succeed. I hope it does. We all want it to. But we know that there's a big swell in this whole area of donor conceived. And I apologize for not getting my facts right. Yes, it's ancient. It even started in 1770, was the very first in England, and then 1880 something in America. And it's very popular in the 30s, but with frozen sperm in 1953, and a lot of the innovations in the 70s and the 80s, it's gotten very, very strong, and it's likely to only get bigger, where adoption is shifting gears a bit. So I think it is important that we join forces, but I think this push has to also be made on some of its own ground.
Yeah, I think looking to the ASRM is banging one's head against a wall. And so I'm wondering, and I is looking at pediatricians. I mean, looking at other people who wouldn't have the same investment, and even I thought of the National Institute of Mental Health, looking at other places, and I guess maybe even, mental health, like National Association of Social Workers, or...
I've written everybody. I've written all the mental health professionals in fertility clinics, OBGYNs, embryologists. I've gone to the National Institute of Health. I've gone to the Surgeon General. There's nowhere I haven't been,
and
trying to get people to align with us to move the industry forward in a more responsible way. I have knocked on every door.
Yeah.
So this one, when Representative Polis let us in, it was like, holy cow, someone really, is going to listen. And, again, I'm not optimistic it's going to go anywhere, but it's because I've tried all of that. I've sent letters to every single sperm bank, every single egg fertility, egg clinic, and egg agency, and...
Yeah, but those people are ASRM.
Right.
That's who. So, but pediatricians aren't ASRM. Do you know?
Right. And what I get from people who are, kind of one level out is they say, "Great work." I can't, but good. Keep doing what you're doing. Good job.
One problem with going to pediatricians, it's the one branch of medicine whose main client is not the patient. the main clients are the parents. And they're the ones that pay the bills. There's some big social changes that didn't happen because of that. And so I think that might not be a very good ending. I think the best thing that we can do at this point is to build up the critical mass of people who are speaking out, and through the media, through DSR, and through whatever I can do through my donor conception, people conceived via artificial insemination website, is to encourage my members to take part in the more public forums, even though they risk the condemnation of some very conservative parents who think, yeah, well, you should be grateful. I'm not sure we're ready for legislation until we can get. You have to have a critical mass of support behind it.
Ryan, where's all the young people in this movement?
That's a good question. It might just be that they're still too young.
Okay.
And I think that over the next 5 to 10 years, we'll see a lot more action from them as they sort of come of age and these things become important to them. I'm not sure if we have statistics on it, but I would estimate that the majority of offspring on our website are below the age of 10. So in the coming decade, it's likely that as those people come of age, the issues that so far have only been really visible to the minority of donor offspring who were conceived in the 1980s and early 1990s, as well as their parents and the donors, those issues will become more and more visible to the people, arguably to whom it matters most, and we'll certainly see what they have to say about it.
One follow-up question I have for you is, in adoption, there's often the issue of what I might call conversion, where society says you should be fine being an adoptee. There shouldn't be a problem with closed adoption or some secrecy. You're lucky, it's a good situation. And I sense that there are some of the same myths in assisted reproduction. And so when some people are younger and they're kind of swayed by, the social milieu, it takes a while, at least in adoption again, to wake up to the idea that, oh, there are some things that should be different about adoption. There are some things that are different about my life that I'd like to have happen. There are societal blocks to that. I want to achieve that. I start to get a little bit of an activist agenda. Is that something that you think is common in the assisted reproductive population as well, the donor conceived, that there's kind of a wake-up time?
Yeah, certainly. I think it's becoming less so. More and more in the past. I think that the arc that we're seeing with artificial insemination is very similar to the arc that we saw with adoption. Mm-hmm. It's just sort of, lagging by
20, 30 years.
30 years, mm-hmm. Exactly. Mm-hmm. So there definitely was a that sort of misplaced should attitude about how offspring should feel about it.
Right.
You should be happy to be here. You should be this. But I think that that more and more as this issue has gotten the visibility that it has, and that as assisted reproductive medicine has become more and more prevalent in our society, mm-hmm. It's something that in much the same way adoption did, mm-hmm. It's sort of been realized that that's not really appropriate to tell a donor conceived offspring how they should feel about it. Right. That it needs to be the other way around. We need to perceive the feelings of the donor mm-hmm. conceived and sort of adjust our practices based on what those feelings are.
I think the biggest factor in reform and adoption came about through books by Florence Fisher, B.J. Lifton, early pioneers who told their stories. The adoptees speak out. That made a huge difference. Then there were sociologists who started studying it and realizing that it wasn't all hunky-dory, and that the prevalence of non-disclosure in adoption practices was hurting a lot of people. Then they could get some really firm data on it. The problem with getting firm data on donor conception families is that so many of us have not been told that the research that we do I've done a study of 140. She's done a study of 500 and some donor-conceived people, and there's another study. There's several studies. But every time those studies get published, there are criticisms about, you don't have enough of a database to make these claims. But anybody who studies probability and statistics realizes that actually is a very significant number. 500. So
We had 751.
750,
That's pretty
right.
significant for a research
yeah,
study.
but people will continue to criticize that.
Yeah.
It says, what about all those people who don't know about their conception? Well,
you can't
how can you
ask them.
study that? I mean, that's a paradox.
Right.
It's crazy.
So it seems like there's a lot of mutual feeling up here about the things that need to happen and what the issues are. So the question, some of us were thinking a while back about how to further this agenda. And, Bill, you've been in this field for a long, long time.
25 years.
Yeah, very long time. So, and you guys are a powerhouse, and you're doing so much. So the question is maybe how to organize. Does it make sense to support organizations that are already there, like yours? Is there a need to build a wing on the side of that, or have a different organization that's allied? So like the AAC came into being at some point. There were other adoption organizations. That's part of how the adoption movement got going. Sometimes it's better to have everything in one. Sometimes it's good to have some variety. I think that's the question, is to figure out what makes sense and whether to build some connection to adoption, which seems to make sense to Phyllis and I and Chris. And Bill, it sounds like from your comments as well. So I think that's kind of our topic for tonight, is to brainstorm a little bit about that respectfully, given how much everybody here has already done. I've done a lot in adoption, but not so much in this area. So I feel a little more modest what I can contribute here. But just to frame that question, I'm just wondering if people have thoughts about that.
Well, Wendy, you mentioned Resolve, and I've had problems with Resolve. And I'm not sure what you're speaking to Phyllis about, but my experience with Resolve, it is totally
I think that was Wendy and Phyllis talking about that. Yeah.
It's totally a parent-focused organization, and it's funded by fertility companies, fertility drug companies. I mean, I went to an IVF conference in Sydney back in 1993, and I was sponsored by the Donor Conception Support Group of Australia, and they raised about $500. I had to pay the rest of my way to get there. I stayed at Leona Hewitt's back bedroom for 2 weeks, and there were all of these infertility specialists who were coming to that IVF conference, including two who were wanted by U.S. authorities from the sperm bank at UC Irvine. They were showing up in Australia. If we'd contacted the consulate, they could have been arrested. But all of these people were sponsored by groups like Pergonon and all of the drug companies, and their displays there was incredible. And they got credit for coming there, and they had all this money, and they were being given free meals and tours of Sydney. And here I had to come on my own half of my dime and stay in somebody's back room. And there just weren't enough of us there. There were some DI conceived adults from Australia there, and that's where it's really becoming a big cohort. That's one cohort that we really need to rely on. What they're doing in Victoria right now is incredibly significant. But I'm not sure we're ready in the United States for that yet. That's my firm belief. I don't think we have it.
Well, what do we need to do organizationally to go a next step?
I can wait my turn. Is this on? Okay, good. I can wait my turn if you're in the middle of a thought, John.
No, it's an open question. Please.
If I may interject, my name is Ashley McGill. My wife and I she's pregnant right now with our first child, who was conceived using donor sperm. And I'm interested in being involved at the ground level of whatever is going on. And I have some ideas. I think it's important to know that I'm not interested in me. I'm interested in my daughter. And so I think that there's a big audience that's left untapped, and I think maybe that we might not have to wait for the next generation of donor-conceived children to become aware of their rights. I think that the way to get going on this is education for the parents, for the people who are, on the sperm bank websites and purchasing sperm and not realizing the implications of choosing an anonymous donor. They don't think about it, because coming from a person who, I don't have any infertility, my partner does not either, but we've been thinking about it and planning for this and talking about it for several years, and so the focus has been, we want to have a baby. But this is my mom, and she is an adoptee, so we've known for a long time that it was important to us to give our daughter everything we could give her about her other half. So I feel like there are a lot of people who don't have the experiences that we have with knowing how important it is to know your medical history and where you come from. It's a big part of our identities. So I think that there are a lot of people who are very threatened by the idea of having a donor who is known to the child, and I think that comes out of a fear, and the fear comes from lack of education. And so I feel like if maybe we could kind of find people, maybe through the DSR, which I have every intention of being a lifetime member of. I feel a little superstitious at the moment, paying for it before our daughter's born. But I think that, there's also a group on mothering.com that I'm a member of that's specifically for queer parents. And I think that there's a big audience out there, particularly of lesbian couples, but obviously also of heterosexual couples with male factor infertility that do opt for donor sperm. I think that a lot of these people just don't realize the implications of what they're choosing, and they're making these decisions for their child's life, and they just are ignorant, is all it is. And I think that we have an opportunity to get out there and to educate them on these choices, and to say just because you choose an identity release donor does not mean that your child, when they're 18, is automatically going to run off and go and live with somebody else and disown you as their parent. And I think that's a big fear. So I wonder if maybe some of us can kind of get out there and ask people if they're willing to come to a local meeting and talk about it, kind of like we're doing here, because most of the big urban cities have large groups of people who are going through sperm banks and conceiving children this way. And I've actually come across a lot of people who are very interested in making sure their kids have rights and have knowledge, and I think that they would be involved. They want to be involved. They just don't know how to get involved. So I think we could help them.
On the research side of that, we did just publish a study on 244 non-biological parents to kind of give a voice to the moms and the dads who are not biologically related to the kids. So, and we're also presenting a piece of research this summer on 1,700 sperm donor recipients. So the mothers, what have you learned? What would you do differently? Mm-hmm. What advice would you give?
That's an incredible study. That's a
really
great resource.
We're working on a paper. We're also working on a paper of 109 egg donors that we want to, egg donor parents, I'm sorry. We've already published research on the egg donors. But the thing I guess I want to say, Ryan and I have talked at LGBT, at the LA LGBT Center. The LGBT crowd is a tough one in our realm, because we come up against a lot of resistance, and it is, like you say, it's fear. Legal fear, which is totally justified, for the non-biological mom. But there's also that kind of, sometimes we run up against DNA does not make a family. It is not important to my child. It's a piece of genetic material. It's just a cell. It doesn't mean anything. And we've done a lot in education to say maybe to you it's just a cell or a piece of donated material, whatever. And that's fine for you to view it like that. But your child may see it very, very differently. And like my child, they might grow up and when they're 2 say, so did my dad die or what? and then you have to start explaining, and then if they have curiosities, it's not just about telling. People sometimes, what I hear is at the end of the story is telling. It's all about disclosure. Well, to me, that was like last decade's conversation. I think we've made progress there. It's not the end of the story, though, because just telling a child, then you have to honor their curiosities and their desire to know their ancestry and their medical history. So it's taking it one step further, but I think you're exactly right. It's educating the parents to be ready for that. Just like in adoption, we know some kids are mildly curious. Some kids have that yearning and great desire to know where they come from. You don't know what kind of kid you're going to get. So better as a prospective parent to really be prepared to, what if you have one of those kids, like, Ryan was 6 and he was saying, I want to know who my biological father is. Oh boy, no one warned me
Can
about
I add
that.
Can I add to that a little bit? I give the Sperm Bank of California incredible amount of credit for what they've done to change this whole idea about disclosure and having identity release donors. It's been the lesbian community that it's made all the difference until we came along and Wendy came along, and now we're getting parents involved, and parent groups in Australia and London and England, the Donor Conception Network in England and Donor Conception Support Group in Australia. They've been the primary movers behind legislation in those countries. But there's also problems with, as Wendy says, there are attitudes in the LGBT community that even though they want to know, they still want to control how their child sees who they are themselves, and instead of letting the child define himself. Well, often, I get this all the time. Whenever I post on a public thing, they'll criticize the terms I use. They'll criticize the fact that I even think that my mother's sperm donor is my father, because he's technically my father. And it's you have to educate the community that it isn't just sperm, he's not tissue, that it doesn't matter. It does matter.
I think that's going to change. Just for me, I am a lesbian and I'm also adoptee. So now that I'm thinking about having a family, it's going to affect me a lot differently. I didn't find out I was adopted until I was 18. So I know that when I have a child, no matter how my partner and I conceive, whether it's with a known friend, which I hope he'll say yes, but if not, if I'm going through, a sperm donor bank, I will let my child know who they are as soon as that question arises. I prefer to have someone who my child will be able to say, this is my genetic other half. Yes, I have 2 mommies, but this is my genetic other half. And I think it comes from, if we have the LGBT community that is connected to adoption, they will understand that. And I think that will be a huge movement. There are plenty of LGBT here at this conference who are adoptees. And I think that's where there needs to be the combination of working together, because we will understand the importance of that. It's not just a cell. It is the other genetic half, and it's that part of who am I is going to form our identity.
We also have LGBT members of the donor of the PCVAI, my private group, who are using known donors for their children, and they have no access themselves to the identity of their genetic fathers.
I think with every group that we address, that we interact with, that we are made up of, that there are unique cultural components to that group. There are unique contexts for how that group is functioning in society, what discrimination that group has been through, how they respond to the desiring of ownership of parenting, how they are feeling compared to the majority. I think that's all very, very complex. And certainly I think over time there will be a whole evolution how these education streams flow into different groups and how those groups come back and educate, the people in assisted reproduction. It's an interface. It's a very rich interface. The question for me is, we're talking about a lot of good content and very knowledgeable people up here and in our audience. The question is, how do we organizationally launch this. So if we go out 30 years, maybe some things are really ripe and it'll just be obvious what to do. But what do we do today? How do we sow the seeds today? Now, maybe it's already what's existing. Maybe it's with what's Bill is doing, and Chris, and Wendy, and Ryan. Maybe that's where it needs to be. Maybe those seeds are adequate to grow this orchard that'll, yield some fruit over time. Or maybe there are things on top of that, or connected to that, or growing out of that would be good to start now, so that we get where we want to get 10, 15 years down the road. We know it's not going to be in 5 years. We know it's going to take time. So what do we want to do now to try and create an outcome down the road? That's the question for this evening, in a way.
If I may, just real quick, I wanted to say that, Wendy, I 100% agree with what you were saying, and as well, Bill, about how difficult of a community the LGBT one can be to break into. And I believe, and I will absolutely get to your question because I do have something to say about the organization of it. I think that my experience has been that automatically the lesbian community in particular is going to automatically be defensive when they're talking to a man, particularly the generation of lesbian prior to mine. And I feel like there's a lot of threat there. There's a lot of the, feminist, we don't need a man, that, it's just a cell. I think I talked to Phyllis about this earlier. I believe, though, there is a good portion of lesbians who feel resentment towards the fact that they have to have a man to be able to have their family. And I think that that's an attitude that I don't know that we're ever going to be able to fix it. I think we're going to have to let it age out. And I do think that there's positive information coming, because I know that, like, mine and Sukari's generation, we are a lot more open to things. We're not, the man-hating butches of the past. And I think that, of course, that's a stereotype. But I wonder, on the organizational side of things, if it wouldn't be easier for a young lesbian couple to break into the education rather than somebody who's an older male and say, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and this is why it's important. I can't help but wonder if that might be true. So I think that if we do want to try and go ahead and get something started going on the ground level, that I think maybe it's going to have to be just, kind of education when the opportunity presents itself. Because as I mentioned earlier to Phyllis today, that you have to wait until some of these couples are receptive to hearing what you have to say. Because, the community at large is very, pride is a big thing. And it's not just a party or a parade. It's an actual, there's pride. And so people want to raise their kids to be proud of their family. So you want to raise them to be proud of having two moms, which is counterintuitive to telling them, oh, you've got a dad out there somewhere, but you can't know him. So I think there needs to be a little bit of an attitude tweak in that area. But I think that maybe it needs to come from within. If we can kind of start to break down some barriers, because I know for sure there are going to be other lesbian couples who I personally know who would be interested in trying to meet in their own cities and get together, like parenting groups or people who are interested in being parents, because it's a big movement right now. And Wendy, please correct me if I'm wrong. I think that lesbian couples are bound to be the largest population who are actually using donor sperm at the moment.
Yeah, on our website, 46% of the parents are in the LGBT community.
Mm-hmm.
Between 18 and 20% now are heterosexual couples.
Right.
It just keeps going down and down and down,
Mm-hmm.
and the rest are single mothers by choice.
Absolutely. And then as far as the heterosexual couples, there are some who I think want to be forthcoming with the information about the fact that their child was donor conceived, but I'd say by and far the large majority of them are ashamed. They absolutely do not want to do it, whereas when you've got two moms, it's pretty obvious pretty soon that you can't be
I don't
biologically
think
conceived.
that's necessarily true.
You don't, about the heterosexual couples?
Yeah.
My experience with the donor conceived people I know in Australia, they're all primarily from heterosexual couples.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, what I'd recommend to you is to contact, in fact, if you send me your email, I'll put you in contact with Susan Kane, and as another lesbian mother on our PC. I think it really takes somebody who actually is donor conceived as well as lesbian and who wants to use donor conception. I think those two women are probably going to be the prime movers of helping your community, because they know it from both sides, and Sue Kane is incredibly eloquent about it. She'd really be the good person to work with.
That's a great point. And of course, I don't know specifically, I mean, it's not like I know thousands of heterosexual couples. It's my experience is just the sperm bank I used has its own forum, and the heterosexual couples there tend to not want to disclose. So forgive me for being incorrect.
But and the other thing is, I don't know if you're talking about me personally, about an old male doing this, but I'm not the only one. And primarily the people in my community who are really speaking out are women in their 30s, heterosexual, but two of them who are lesbian. But
and they were donor conceived?
Pardon?
The lesbian were donor conceived?
Right.
I think those are going to be the biggest voices. I think you're right.
And just like the male adoptee group that I'm part of here, I need to start a group of donor conceived adult, because we don't have as much of a united voice on the group. I mean, it's about 15% male on my private group. And the other point is, that a lot of us older donor conceived people from age 25 up, it's the old generation. They want to take the lead. I don't think it makes. They resent Wendy. They resent the parent groups in England and Australia. They don't want to be taken over. They don't want their story to be interpreted by parent groups or sociologists or
I can completely understand that. I don't want to step on anybody's toes at all. I just feel like
it's our issue.
It absolutely is.
We're the ones who were most deeply affected. My parents had every right to do what they did, but they're dead. For me, it's a lifetime thing.
Right, absolutely. And I do think that you guys should be the forefront.
Right.
But I think that as a transitory kind of a thing, until the next generation, like Ryan said, gets up there, somebody's got to speak for my daughter.
Well, my group ranges in age from 18 to 68, so it's all generations. So it's a wide spectrum. But there's so many of these people who have not been told, and I know they're out there who are my age. I mean, we get new ones every day.
Absolutely.
Who are in their 50s and 60s. So. As long as that continues to build, and maybe we shouldn't be a private, safe haven website, but we need that aspect of it so that we can feel that we can speak bluntly without being criticized by parent communities. Right, Wendy? I mean, you see it on.
I just want to say, Ryan and I are the voice for your child. We're out there working really, really hard, speaking at conferences, talking to the industry. We're going to California Cryobank in 2 weeks to talk to them. We are out there speaking for your kid and for every other kid out there.
I know you are. You work very hard, and I appreciate you.
And we hope, that we're speaking for, the LGBT community and their kids, just regardless of what type of family you are, it is about the kids, and that's our first focus, is making sure that we move everybody forward, like learn from the world of adoption. There's a ton that we should have learned from the world of adoption that we didn't. Okay, well, now that we've had a couple of decades here with kids like Ryan growing up, what have we learned from them? A lot. And now we've published the research. And so we have a lot of information now to help educate parents and the industry and all of us in the family. So we're working as hard as we can work to represent you as parents, you as grandparents, prospective parents, everybody. We're trying to keep everyone's best interests, not just the parents, but the donors' parents, everybody's best interests at heart.
Wendy, I'm wondering if there's a possibility of having resource other resources available in different areas to speak about the issue, because there's only the wonderful two of you. So I don't know if that's even a possibility, and I think that's part what I'm hearing.
Well, I hope that I haven't come across as trying to take over. I'm saying, how can I help you?
Yeah. Would you like to write something for our website to the LGBT community?
Sure.
Because that'd be awesome. I can't speak to them like you can.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's
I would love to.
yeah.
Excellent.
Let me. I want to add, which is my big thing to the adoption, and I think an issue here is the emotional trauma of the experience of infertility. And so it's really all those emotional feelings that I think need to be spoken to, and what this means to be a different kind of community, forming a family that really has to be addressed, because we know how the head, the mind and heart can go together, and if the heart hasn't been opened, the mind is not going to allow itself to be educated. So I think that's also a really important piece.
How do you see Resolve doing that?
Well, how I see work with couples that I've worked with is to talk about what a major loss it is to not have one's own biological child. And
that's well known.
no, it's
well
not,
known to
because, well, it might be well known to you, but in much the same way that adoptees have been told that, their birth families didn't really want them and they did the best thing for them, and these people love them who want to raise them, and shouldn't they be happy? I think for couples who can't have their own biological child and are crying and dealing with a lot of loss and pain, to the outside community, people say to them, it's not like you had a child who died. Well, people who go through IVF treatments and are given little pictures of their sonogram before they find out if they have a pregnancy or not, that's their first picture of this child that could have been. So it is a very profound loss.
I get that. But, from my perspective, and I think probably Ryan's too, when we look up at the literature and we see the media, it's predominantly sensitive to the plight of the infertile couple.
Mm-hmm.
Very rarely do they talk about the human being who they create,
Right.
and that human being as anything more than a baby.
Okay, but
We are human beings who grow up and become adults who need to have rights. Is that right?
Okay, but I don't think one cancels out the other. And there
We're
was
not
a
saying that either.
sociologist, David Kirk, who wrote a book called Shared Fate. And it was about the mutual losses of adopted people and their parents, of really being able to appreciate for each is the way a sense of empathy that each could have for each other.
Well, I agree. But right now, all the empathy is for infertile people.
This is so much like adoption, because in the beginning there was so much focus on the adoptive parents, and that's inappropriate. It's totally inappropriate, like you're saying, Bill. The challenge. Oh, go
It's
ahead.
inappropriate to continue focusing on the best interests of the child as well. It isn't about children necessarily. It's about human beings. And that
We don't want to
that's an argument
infantilize these. Yeah.
That's the argument I get with Chris. I mean, you're talking about raising kids. What do you tell your children? I mean, what about the issues for adults like Ryan and I and me?
Right, and adoptees don't want to be infantilized as always having been the baby or the child, or foster kids, and they're 30 years old and they're still told they're a foster kid because there aren't other names. Right, right. It's frustrating. I agree with you. The challenge is that in adoption, it's much like the movie Braveheart. You have England, that could be ASRM, and then you've got all these Scottish, bands that are fighting each other, and that happened in adoption. A lot of the perfect storm in adoption ended up pitting the adoptive parents against the other triad members. Some of that was the fault of the adoptive parents, some of it wasn't. They had their own neuroses, they had their own fears, they had their own loss issues. And the big lesson there is that if we don't have a unified message, we're nowhere. We're divided, we're torn. Adoption's still trying to heal from that. And so if we can do it better here, I think what I sense Phil is saying, although I understand Resolve is politically bound to some other organizations that twist it a certain direction. They have an investment in keeping them marching a certain direction. But if we can get to those people, I think those are some of the people you were saying in other countries were the ones who are very powerful in changing legislation. So if we can reach those people, and often we reach them through loss. Through loss, they can understand the other loss. And then we can bring everybody together and have more of a unified movement. So hopefully that's something that unifies, not something that tears us apart.
And I think this whole organization that Wendy and Ryan represents is really education of those that are entering into donor conceptions and all the ways that they can make better choices for their children ahead. When parents get started, and I've raised 3 daughters, I don't see them as adults. I see them as growing children that will become adults, and hopefully all that I've put into them will be shown as they're adults and responsible for their own being. But educating the parents to what the child's needs are that will then become an adult, I think is really pertinent to the support and education that you provide. Is that not true?
That's very true. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we try to help. Personally, I try to provide to other people what I never got myself. Nobody told me any of this. So I try to think, okay, what would I have wanted to know before I embarked on this journey? What would be important to know about the people to be born? What are their needs, and what's the right way to go here? And so that's one of our goals. I mean, we're educating, we're forming a community, and obviously the main thing we do is we're connecting people who want to be connected with each other. So I don't know where we go here as a new entity. I kind of feel like, and I've expressed this to Chris, I've already been running in circles for so long, looking for people to help, and I come back to just being right where I started, and we just press forward with the things that we know that do work, with the research and the media, getting the stories out there and that kind of thing, because I feel like as far as moving the industry forward, we've done little to nothing, and
unfortunately we're sort of an expert in the problems but not in the solutions.
Yeah.
So.
Well, if we look at adoption, adoption had a zillion organizations, and you are a very powerful organization. You're at the forefront of this field, obviously. You're pioneers, Bill also, with what he's been doing. Chris, in your own way, in looking at good practice. So when I look at adoption, I think, different organizations have offered different things. If we look at gay and lesbian culture, LGBTQ, we look at GLAAD, for example. They're very powerful with the media. They're very media focused. There are other groups that have been more about alliance, other groups that have been, more fostering of gay pride days and, film festivals and all sorts of things. So if this is really going to succeed, again, I wonder, is it more about a collection of organizations? Maybe there's room for some other organizations that are not about turf, it's just working in tandem. Or is it more under your umbrella, Bill's umbrella in a different way to, push something forward? It sounds like you're busy going everywhere, talking to everybody you can, and you're doing a great job of that. You're very well established. And you're noticing that you get some movement, and a lot of the good notoriety in the public is probably because of the efforts of people like Bill and the two of you. But how do we go further if you're saying that that's not quite getting where you're getting the invitations, but you're not getting enough movement from the people that you're talking to? So maybe another organization aligns with yours and assists with the research you're doing collaboratively, or maybe it's getting connected to a university, or maybe it's an organization hosts a different kind of website that's linked to yours, or maybe that adds to your website. I don't know. But that's the thing to think about. It's a lot. You two sound very, very busy, and you're doing a lot, but this is a huge, huge area that probably could involve many people in many different ways, and so it's just thinking about that. How do we start to plant some seeds with that?
And I've tried to enroll people to help too.
Mm-hmm.
We formed an international organization to sort of group together all of us in Australia and New
Great.
Zealand and
Uh-huh.
the UK and Canada and Germany and France. So we pulled together this organization, and I made a website, and we listed the things we all want, end donor anonymity and record keeping and
Yeah.
better testing for egg donors and all of the things that need to be fixed. And we made this, and we came together. And that was that.
Uh-huh.
We have an organization and a web page,
Okay.
but then
I
no
don't
one.
even know about this.
We did that after up at Diane Allen's
That's the one I missed.
conference, right? Like in 2008, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing is, people want to talk about it, but no one wants to do anything, and that's why, like I say, and then it always comes full circle, and people are like, "What are you going to do?
Mm-hmm.
Really, me? Only me?"
Yeah.
So that's been the problem, is that I'm not doing this by myself or with Ryan because I choose it that way.
Sure.
It's a very lonely job, and I wish I had support.
Yeah. So we're here, and we want to be a part of this, but we want to figure out how to do that.
Right.
I'm sitting here and I hear my mother's voice, who's not alive, and had a way of, she tended towards being Pollyanna-ish, so I'll kind of put that up front. But I do feel a need to focus on the positive, which is this meeting right now is happening at AAC. And it took work to get AAC to say, I want to, yes, we do need to really look at the connection, and I think you're talking about the LGBT community, and I'm sitting here and saying I want to go back and write some articles for Resolve. And again, I have been the support group leader that does do groups for couples dealing with male infertility, and I could tell you, even though we don't get support groups of 6 to 8 couples at a time, and it's hard to get them at the same time, the majority who come do talk about wanting to use known donors. And support groups are wonderful because, again, it's the people who are dealing with the issue that are looking at what the issues and problems can be. And so it's one couple sharing with the other, and I'm the facilitator to raise the questions. So that's, I want to leave here. So that's something I would like to say. I want to go back to Resolve, and there's also, so that's where I want to leave it.
Well, I want to make a comment is that, and maybe I'm being Pollyanna also, but when I started working in a fertility practice it was in '86. That's what, 20 years ago. I don't know. How
25.
long. 25 years ago. The doctor was choosing which donor from which bank went to who. They had no information, zero.
It's
And
me.
And
I didn't pick Ryan's donor.
but anyway,
Look what I got.
You did pretty good.
It worked out all right.
Yeah. I don't know whether there's spiritual intervention there or what.
I don't
Whatever.
know.
Yeah. Okay. But
My mother was not so lucky.
But now there's available choices on the internet. There's you don't see couples that they're. I tell them about the old days, and they say, "Well, we wouldn't have even done that." We need information, we need connection. So I really believe that parents-to-be or parents that are parenting really want to do a good job. They just don't have the information education. And it took the consumers to get all the information that sperm banks and egg banks and embryo placement work is doing. If there wasn't a push from the consumers to get where we are today, it would be still the same way. Because how easy would it be? It was so easy for the physician just to, okay, whatever. Have we used this guy very much this week? No. Okay, we'll use this other guy. That's so easy compared to, okay, what bank, how many banks do you want to look at? And then, okay, you've got this guy, well, he's not available right now. And, that's a longer process that the fertility clinics have to put time into getting accomplished. So we basically forced change by the consumers that were paying for the goods, I guess, in some way. So I'm just hopeful that the youth and more activity will get more consumers wanting the best for their kids. And I think they really deep down do. They just don't know how to process it and how to get there.
Can I ask, Bill, how do you feel about this? I mean, you're a donor-conceived adult. You know more donor-conceived adults than any of us. What are your guys' wildest hopes and dreams? What's the win?
That we all moved to Australia.
I've heard it's nice there, if you like kangaroos.
What I am not as optimistic in any degree as these people are, and primarily it's because our governmental system is totally different than almost the rest of the world.
Yes.
I mean, adoption itself, for it to be struggling ever since Florence Fisher, and they got 10 states.
Yeah.
And that's all. Whereas, when the medical profession is controlled by government, and they're subject to more regulation, that's where change happens. It can't happen from the consumers. Unless the system is fundamentally addressing the lack of control of the medical profession like we have in the United States.
Well, I think.
And I'm so totally discouraged that that's ever going to happen.
I think we need to also look at what
And I'm
happens.
66, and
You'll live for it. With the adoption movement, we're not frozen into closed adoptions. We now have a majority of our adoptions are open in some way.
But that's because you could address laws.
But
There
we-
are no
no,
laws.
That's not.
That was
There's the internet,
supply
too.
demand.
It's
Yeah.
supply and
But,
demand.
but
So-
adoption laws were passed in states that
But-
made those changes
but-
possible.
The adoption laws changed, though, in response to a groundswell of people. The market changed.
But the problem is there are no laws concerning donor conception, right, Wendy?
Right, there's no
I
lot
mean,
of change.
that's the fundamental problem.
But there wasn't a law about open adoption. I mean, birth parents started to, it's like the identity release
But there
at
were
the sperm
laws that
bank.
closed open adoption that existed before the end of World War II.
There were,
Look at Elizabeth Samuels.
But I think the bigger issue, the bigger comparison is what you talked about with the California Sperm Bank. That's where I think we'll get some change when it's through media, when it's through the community that's engaged. They want something different, and something can happen there. that's when a shift, there's a push, there's a natural drive for that. And then the laws, if there are laws, there aren't laws now, but if there are laws eventually, they'll follow that. And that's why I think open adoption is happening. Open adoption is having very little impact on the closed records. But
Right.
adoption is opening in that way. I think the same thing could possibly happen in assisted reproduction, donor conception. So there's that landlocked part of all the people who haven't been told, maybe still because there's a lot of secrecy. That's a big, big continuing issue.
Well, we'll die out eventually.
It's the same with adoption. The people in my time period will die out at some point, or the people we'd be searching for will die out before those records open. But there's still some shifting because there's more open adoption now.
But
So
that's all we can do.
So
Yeah.
open
We
adoption.
can advocate. I mean, there's no way we can fundamentally change an American system.
But
The media.
But we can. But we're using media.
Mhm.
We're persuading. We're pressuring, and we're shaming. And I think that's the only thing we can do.
But I want to make it as clear as possible, because we're being videoed, that open adoptions exist in all states, whether they have open records or closed records.
Mhm.
So the consumers are doing what they think is best, hopefully most. So whether they have an adoption in Missouri or Kansas, because I have open states in Kansas, open records in Kansas, closed in Missouri, the adoptions are the same. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody has their identifying information. So that's what open records would be about, but the families are doing it themselves. They're organizing, they're getting together. Birth parents have more control in terms of who's receiving their child. There's more relationship building. So we're doing that in spite of what that state law is about. So that's where my hope is, that we do it in spite of what the medical institution is doing.
Well, we're trying.
Right, yeah.
But you know, the thing that Wendy did that was amazing. You know, her group and my group started at the same time, and I don't know if you go back and you look at the history on the calendars of both of our groups. I actually
the
had
Yahoo
I had more postings in the first 2 years than you did, and you had 2 or 3 months where you had no postings at all in a row. As soon as you went on the one before, who's the guy?
Oprah.
Before Oprah, who did you?
Oh, Good
John?
Morning America?
No,
John Walsh.
John Walsh.
There was a big jump there, and when you went on Oprah, it exploded.
But that's when we left Yahoo, too, so.
You're still
Well,
on
the
Yahoo.
Yahoo's still the chat
still-
group, but
yeah,
it's not
yeah.
the donor sibling registry.
Yeah, but that's where you get most of your members, wasn't it? On Yahoo? Or
No.
did they come to your registry?
Yahoo's just a small chat group. The
Well,
donor
yeah,
sibling
but-
registry is separate, yeah.
But I'm not sure if that had anything to do with, other than the fact that
Oh,
you're
it's
on
all
Oprah.
media. It's all media
It's all
for
media,
us.
right.
Mhm. We see huge spikes in our membership. That's what keeps
Right.
us going is
Mhm.
media. Absolutely.
But you will have a show like The Kids Are All Right that totally, blow, really screw up the progress of how we look
It
at
brought a lot of donors to our site
Yeah.
who made themselves available. So even so, getting the word out there is getting the word out there. Even things,
Right.
the TV show we did last year, Donor Ben with his 75 donor offspring, everybody said to me, this is the worst thing. No donor will ever come to your site after this. They're all going to be scared. And
Well,
they
that's
came.
good. That's
They
good.
came. It was another form of education. So.
And it's kind of amazing, though. You're talking about research that, like Ken Daniels has done almost 40 years of research on this field, and he's the most prolific researcher on donor conception. And it should have changed things, but it really hasn't. People look, he's a professional, and until things get in the media, if we get a great novelist to write a DI story, that would make the biggest change.
Well, the New York Times article that
Yeah.
had Ryan's picture last September that said one sperm donor, 150 kids.
Right, right.
That got people's attention.
Mm-hmm.
That got the industry's
Right.
attention. But did they do anything to start keeping accurate
No,
records?
no.
No. And that group of 150, I just heard from a mom this morning, the group is now pushing 200.
Right.
They're still selling the sperm.
Right.
So shame on them. So we're working on another New York Times
So
article.
how do we change? How do we change the profession? Is the bottom line, and you can't do it
I don't know
without
if we
laws.
shame them, and it just doesn't, you
I
know.
think
They're
media.
shameless.
I think if we just
Unshameable.
more and more
Yeah.
media, if we pump media, more and more and more, if some of the people that are on your site
They're
would
on
be
there.
willing
They're in the
to,
media as much
okay,
more than I am.
to be public about their views. We need those stories. We need all these compelling stories, and we need all the media channels, and we need concerted organizational ways to do that with as many people who are willing to sign up. Then I think we've got our best chance. I think media is the answer.
Well,
We need BGA Lifton back.
The reason that this Congresswoman Jenkins' office called me was because I sent 2 articles with my my information or call for contact about one donor has 150 kids, and then another donor has 34 kids with a heart defect, and that got attention. It's I am Pollyanna, and I think before I check out of here, there'll be more honest operations.
Well, it's
Well,
like
it-
we just have to shame them. And
And it's a simple matter that anonymity won't work anymore. The more these DNA genealogy sites come back, they connect through the DSR, and then they can find, however you did it. I still haven't figured out how to use my family tree. I don't know how to read the data, but the younger guy's going to do it.
But then look at the world of egg donation.
Yeah.
First there's the world of adoption, and then there's sperm donation on the heels of that.
Yeah.
Almost all egg donors are forced to be anonymous still today.
right.
So they have even a longer way to come than the
Yeah.
world of adoption
Yeah.
or the world of sperm donation.
But this will just keep getting bigger and bigger. This is the future. So if it doesn't happen 30 years from now, it'll happen 50 years
Also
from
the
now.
past.
In the past,
It
yeah.
sounds to me as if I agree 100% that the media is a very important outlet to be able to get our information and our opinions and the truth out there, but that B, it's going to be virtually impossible to get the banks and the fertility clinics to change the way that they're doing things, and maybe we should think again about, I feel like we might be able to actually make some tangible change in the mind of the people who are buying the sperm. And I think that may, in time, actually be able to
That's
force.
where the identity release push came from.
Right.
That's exactly.
But I
how
think
it
we need
came
to keep educating people, because there are still people choosing anonymous donors. Because the thing is that now that more and more people are choosing more and more identity release donors, there are more identity release donors available, which is great. But there are still anonymous donors out there, so there are still people buying anonymous sperm. And I think that if we can get more and more people to buy the ID release, that's a positive step. But we have to also consider that what comes with that is that these sperm banks are paying ID release donors more money. And
They're also doing false advertising too, because as far as I know, the only true ones is the Sperm Bank of California and Rainbow Flag, and then Pacific.
No, there's some sperm banks that advertise open donors.
Mm-hmm.
Willing
But
to be known.
What that means is when a child turns 18, let's say she calls the sperm bank and says, I want to know, and this child's been told her whole life, when you're 18, you're going to get to know your donor.
Right.
She gets to be 18, she makes a request. What the sperm bank does is they send a snail mail letter to the donor saying, please update your files.
Mm-hmm.
No mention in there that there's a 18-year-old daughter
wanting to know him.
Right, and he opens the mail and says, I don't have any information to update. He throws the letter away.
Right.
Then the sperm bank goes back to that girl and says, your donor doesn't want any contact.
Unlike
That's
the
what
Sperm Bank of
open donors
California.
are at some sperm banks.
I know that's.
Sperm Bank of California.
I know that is true.
They're they keep track of where their donors are. These
Absolutely.
others really don't.
Well, they don't know who all the children are because they were one of the families. They were one of the sperm banks with the fatal heart condition,
Oh,
and they
Sperm Bank of
couldn't.
California.
Yeah, they couldn't contact all the families to tell them they had to get their children tested because they don't know who all the families are. So they try harder, but they're
Yeah,
not
right.
perfect.
No, Ryan,
Yeah, you
didn't you
can't get
do
'em to
some
report.
tricks on the computer to find your folk?
Yeah, I did. I'll speak to that in just a second. I just want to address this real quick. I
Okay.
think you've really hit the crux of the issue here, which is that in the United States, everything in private industry is driven by profit, and in order for the change to come from within the sperm banking industry, you either have to have legislation, which we're working on, but realistically it
Has
could
to be profitable.
quite far away. And the other route you can go is to change the consumer demand. And that's why I think the media is so important. is,
Absolutely. I agree 100%.
when the consumers are going to the sperm banks who provide identity release and openness, then that becomes a business model.
Mm-hmm.
And
And the irony is that the Sperm Bank of California is nonprofit.
right, exactly.
But they're not all nonprofit.
And there's
Pardon?
and that's a good point. Is that in Australia and in other places where it's not legal anymore to pay donors for their donations, we've seen these positive changes, and it comes because countries outside of the United States sort of realize that profit isn't always the number one motivator for things, and that's why we see, universal health care and that sort of things in other
There's
countries.
legislative oversight in those countries, too.
Sure, exactly, because
we don't have
because
here.
other countries are better able to recognize that certain issues shouldn't just be driven by profit, but should be driven by the issues that affect the consumers. So, anyway, that's my point about media. And just to speak to your question, I did find my donor through my own means, and that raises a very important point about donor anonymity as well. In the age of DNA and personal DNA testing, you can go get a DNA test for $100 now, and with that information, you have a very good chance at figuring out who your donor is. So the fact that sperm banks are even promising anonymity to their donors anymore, it's a complete fallacy.
More false advertising.
Right.
It's my understanding in New York, my colleagues who work at the program do now speak to donors in saying we can't promise anonymity given what happened in the adoption world. So they are saying that we can't promise it long term. We don't know.
Well, I showed a profile to one of my friends, Marilyn Wall, who's a searcher, and she looked it over and she said, I can find that guy. So just with the basic information, the year he's born and his picture and all the other information about how old their parents are and all that, Marilyn said she can find him.
Well, when
So-
SciTech was using videos, and I'm not sure if they're doing it anymore. I mean, I talked to one woman, he says, I saw this video of this guy, he plays drums and all this, and this is the guy I chose, and then as soon as I got 3 months later when I was pregnant, I walked into a music store and they were selling the drums there. I mean,
It happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, any other questions from our wonderful crowd here? We're so glad you're here. Wendy and I both have information on this table that we want you to take, and take more than we don't want to carry all that back, do we? Or I'm taking yours
You can
back.
take whatever you want.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, but take as many as you want to pass around to your friends that you know and everything. And this conversation will continue. I'm so happy that AAC provided this opportunity for it to be present. And the fact that they videoed this, I think has another significance. It's going to be on the web, and it really shows the adoption community support. And Wendy's going to do a link from her site to this once we get this all finished. So thank you very much for being here, and I hope lots of folks see this conversation.